The fluorescent lights of Riverside Elementary flickered with their usual Tuesday morning persistence as Henri Dubois adjusted his security badge for the third time in 10 minutes. His weathered hands, scarred from years of manual labor before this job, trembled slightly as he watched the chaos unfold in the main hallway. Principal Martinez stood red-faced beside the trophy case, gesturing wildly at the broken glass scattered across the linoleum floor like crystalline tears. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. This is absolutely unacceptable. Martinez's voice echoed off the painted cinder-block walls, bouncing between faded motivational posters and student artwork that hung crooked from pushpins. Someone broke into our school, destroyed property, and we have no idea who or why. Henri stepped closer, his worn work boots making soft squeaks against the freshly waxed floor. The scent of industrial cleaning solution, mixed with the lingering aroma of yesterday's cafeteria fish sticks, created an oddly comforting backdrop to the morning's drama. He'd grown accustomed to these smells over the past 3 years. The way they clung to his uniform and followed him home to the small apartment he shared with his 8-year-old daughter. "Margot, Monsieur Martinez," Henri said softly, his French accent coloring the words like watercolors bleeding into white paper. "Perhaps we should examine the scene more carefully before drawing conclusions, non?" The principal turned toward Henri with barely concealed irritation. "Henri, I appreciate your concern, but this is a matter for the police and the school board. Just make sure the area stays clear until they arrive." But Henri was already kneeling beside the broken trophy case, his trained eyes scanning the debris with the methodical precision that had once made him invaluable in situations far more dangerous than a small-town school break-in. The way the glass had shattered suggested impact from the inside out, not from an external force. The positioning of the trophies, some fallen, others still standing in perfect formation, told a story that didn't align with random vandalism. "Papa, you're here early!" Margot's voice cut through the tension like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She bounded down the hallway with the uninhibited joy of childhood, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, dark curls escaping from the careful braid Henri had woven that morning, while she ate her breakfast of toast and jam. Henri rose quickly, brushing glass dust from his knees, and opened his arms to catch his daughter in their customary morning hug. She smelled of strawberry shampoo and the faint vanilla of the French vanilla creamer she always convinced him to let her add to her milk. "Bonjour, ma petite étoile," he whispered against her hair, using the endearment that never failed to make her giggle. "My little star. You are early today as well." "Mrs. Chen dropped me off on her way to work," Margot explained, pulling back to study her father's face with the intense scrutiny only children possessed. "Why do you look worried? And why is Principal Martinez making that face, like when Tommy Rodriguez put gum in Sarah's hair?" Before Henri could respond, Detective Sarah Coleman pushed through the main entrance doors, her badge catching the morning light streaming through the windows. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with prematurely grey hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. Henri had seen her around town but had never spoken with her directly. "Principal Martinez." "I'm Detective Coleman. I understand you had a break-in." As the adults clustered around the crime scene, Margot tugged on her father's sleeve. "Papa, look," she whispered, pointing to something glinting beneath the fallen trophies. "There's something pretty under there." Henri followed her gaze and felt his breath catch in his throat. Partially hidden beneath a second-place spelling bee trophy was a small object that made his hands shake with sudden, overwhelming recognition. It was a signet ring, ornate and golden, bearing a coat of arms that he hadn't seen in 15 years, but that was burned into his memory like a brand. The fleur-de-lis at the center, the crossed swords, the crown that seemed to mock him even now, tarnished with dust and the debris of his carefully constructed American life. "Margot," he said quietly, his accent thickening with emotion. Go to your classroom. Tell Madame Wilson that Papa will pick you up as usual this afternoon. But I want to see what happened. Was it really robbers? Did they take anything important? Henri knelt to his daughter's level, cupping her face gently in his hands. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, so innocent of the complexities that had driven him across an ocean to this small Ohio town, searched his face for answers he couldn't give. Sometimes, ma chérie, the most important things are not what they take, but what they leave behind. Go now. Learn well today. As Margot reluctantly headed toward the elementary wing, Henri turned back to the crime scene. Detective Coleman was photographing everything methodically, while Principal Martinez provided a running commentary of complaints about security measures and insurance claims. But Henri's attention was fixed on the ring. He knew exactly what it was, who it belonged to, and what its presence here meant. After 15 years of carefully crafted anonymity, of night shifts and day shifts, and overtime hours to keep Margot fed and clothed and safe, someone had found him. The question was, what did they want? He thought of the small apartment where Margot's school pictures lined the refrigerator next to crayon drawings of their life together. Stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Their names written in her careful first-grade handwriting, Margot and Papa. He thought of the bedtime stories he told her, carefully edited fairy tales, where the princes were farmers and the castles were cozy cottages, where happily ever after meant safety and stability rather than crowns and kingdoms. He thought of the box hidden in his bedroom closet. Beneath old photographs and Margot's baby clothes, he couldn't bring himself to donate. Inside that box were documents that could change everything, birth certificates and marriage licenses, and official seals that proved he was not just Henri Dubois, security guard at Riverside Elementary, devoted single father scraping by on an hourly wage. The ring seemed to wink at him from its bed of broken glass, and Henri felt the weight of his past settling back onto his shoulders like a familiar, unwelcome coat. He had run from responsibility once, choosing love over duty, choosing the woman who had become Margot's mother over the life that had been planned for him since birth. But Isabella was gone now, claimed by cancer when Margot was barely 3, and all his running had led him here, to a Tuesday morning in an Ohio elementary school, staring at a piece of his past that refused to stay buried. "Sir? Excuse me, sir?" Detective Coleman's voice pulled him back to the present. She was standing beside him, studying his face with professional curiosity. "You seem to recognize something about this scene," she said. It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. Henri felt the familiar urge to deflect, to smile and shrug and blend back into the background where he was safest. But Margot's safety had always been his priority, and if someone was leaving calling cards in her school, if his past was bleeding into their carefully constructed present, then maybe it was time to stop running. "Detective Coleman," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "I believe we need to talk, but not here, and not in front of the children." She nodded, understanding something in his tone that went deeper than a simple break-in. "My office. This afternoon, after school hours, as the morning proceeded and the broken glass was swept away, as normal routines resumed and children laughed in classrooms, Henri carried the weight of that hidden ring like a secret stone in his chest. He walked his usual rounds, checking doors and monitoring the playground, smiling at teachers who greeted him warmly and students who waved from classroom windows. But his mind was 15 years in the past, in a world where his name meant something different, where his choices affected more than just himself and his daughter. He thought of the promises he'd made and the promises he'd broken, of the people who had trusted him and the people he had disappointed. Most of all, he thought of Margot, currently learning about butterflies in Mrs. Wilson's second-grade class, completely unaware that her father's carefully buried secrets were clawing their way to the surface like spring flowers pushing through winter soil. The lunch bell rang, and Henri watched children stream out of classrooms with their brown bags and lunch trays. their voices creating a symphony of innocence and joy. Somewhere among them was his daughter, probably trading her apple slices for cookies and telling elaborate stories about imaginary adventures. What would he tell her when the truth finally surfaced? How did you explain to an 8-year-old that her papa, who worked nights and weekends to afford her dance classes and summer camp, who helped with homework at their tiny kitchen table and sang lullabies in French, was someone else entirely? The afternoon couldn't come soon enough, and yet Henri dreaded it with every fiber of his being, because he knew that once he walked into Detective Coleman's office, once he acknowledged the significance of that ring, there would be no going back to the simple life they had built together. The secret that had kept them safe was about to become the very thing that destroyed their peace. The remainder of the school day passed with the surreal quality of a movie playing at half speed. Henri moved through his familiar routines, checking the perimeter fence at noon, monitoring the main entrance during lunch pickup, ensuring all classroom doors remained locked from the outside, but his mind remained fixed on that golden ring and what it represented. By 3:15, as the final bell released students into the afternoon sunshine, Henri found himself standing outside Detective Coleman's modest office on Main Street, staring at the faded brass nameplate as if it might offer some guidance. The building housed 3 other small businesses: a tax preparation service, a real estate office, and a shop that sold handmade quilts. Normal American unremarkable businesses in a normal American unremarkable town. "Papa! Papa, wait for me!" Margot's voice carried across the parking lot. And Henri turned to see her running toward him, backpack bouncing, one shoe untied. Her face flushed with the particular joy that came from sharing playground secrets with friends. "Madame Chen is picking me up today, remember?" Henri knelt to retie her shoe, his fingers working automatically while his heart hammered against his ribs. "Oh, right! But first, can you help me with something?" She dug through her backpack and produced a slightly crumpled worksheet covered in math problems. "I don't understand this one about the word problems. It says, if a king has 247 gold coins and gives away 89 to help poor families, how many coins does he have left?" The irony was so sharp it nearly made Henri laugh or cry. Instead, he guided Margot to a bench beneath a maple tree whose leaves were just beginning to hint at autumn colors. "Well, ma petite étoile, let us think about this together. The king starts with 247 coins, and he chooses to give away 89 to help others. So we subtract 247 minus 89. Margot's forehead wrinkled in concentration as she worked through the problem with her pencil. 158. He has 158 left. But Papa, why would a king give away his money? Isn't he supposed to keep it all for himself? Henri was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter's earnest face as she waited for an answer. Sometimes, ma chérie, the most important thing a king can do is remember that being king means taking care of everyone in his kingdom, not just himself. The true measure of a ruler is not how much he keeps, but how much he gives. Have you ever met a real king, Papa? The question hung in the air between them like a soap bubble, beautiful and fragile and ready to burst at the slightest touch. Once, perhaps, Henri said softly, but that was a very long time ago, in a place far from here. Mrs. Chen's familiar Honda Civic pulled into the parking lot, and Margot jumped up to wave. Before she ran to the car, she threw her arms around Henri's neck and planted a sticky kiss on his cheek. "I love you, Papa, even if you are just a security guard and not a king or anything fancy," as Henri watched the car disappear around the corner. Margot's small hand waving from the back window, he felt something crack inside his chest. Just a security guard. The phrase echoed in his mind as he climbed the stairs to Detective Coleman's office. She was waiting for him behind a desk that had seen better decades, surrounded by filing cabinets and coffee-stained reports. The office smelled of burnt coffee and the lingering traces of whatever sandwich she'd eaten for lunch. A small fan whirred in the corner, pushing warm air around the cramped space. "Mr. Dubois, thank you for coming." She gestured to a metal chair across from her desk. I have to admit, your reaction to the crime scene this morning was interesting. Henri sat carefully, his hands folded in his lap, every instinct screaming at him to deflect and leave and return to the safety of anonymity. But the weight of that ring, now sealed in an evidence bag on Coleman's desk, made avoidance impossible. "The ring," he said simply. "You wish to know about the ring?" "Among other things." Coleman leaned back in her chair, studying him with the patient intensity of someone accustomed to unraveling complicated truths. "I ran some preliminary checks this afternoon. Henri Dubois, age 38, moved to Riverside 15 years ago with a pregnant wife. Wife died of cancer 8 years ago, leaving you to raise your daughter alone. Clean record, steady employment, well regarded in the community." She paused. "But your immigration papers are sparse, almost too clean." Henri felt his carefully constructed identity shifting beneath him like sand. "I came here for a better life. Is this not the American dream?" "It is. But most people don't run from better lives, Mr. Dubois. They run to them. And that ring suggests you might have been running from something pretty significant." The silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on Main Street. Henri thought of Margot, probably already settled at Mrs. Chen's kitchen table with an after-school snack and homework spread before her. She would be expecting him to pick her up at 6, would want to tell him about her day, would curl up beside him on their second-hand couch to watch cartoons before dinner, their Tuesday routine. Their safe, predictable, unremarkable Tuesday routine. "My full name," Henri said quietly, "is Henri Alexandre Philippe Dubois Montclair." Detective Coleman's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's quite a mouthful. I was the second son of the Duke of Montclair in the Normandy region of France." The words felt strange in his mouth after so many years of careful omission. "Third in line to inherit the duchy, though such titles carry more tradition than actual power in modern France." "So your nobility." Henri laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was nobility. I gave up everything, title, inheritance, family, country, for love." He told her about Isabella then, about the art student from California who had been studying at the Sorbonne when they met. How her laugh had sounded like music after years of formal dinners and diplomatic conversations. How she had seen him not as a duke's son, but as simply Henri, a man who made terrible jokes and loved American jazz and dreamed of a life where his worth wasn't determined by bloodlines and centuries-old obligations. "My family did not approve," Henri continued, his accent thickening with emotion. "Isabella was not suitable. Common birth, no connections, no fortune to contribute to the family coffers. They forbade the marriage, but you married her anyway. We eloped, came to America on tourist visas that we extended through various means. Margot was born here, making her an American citizen by birthright. Isabella and I eventually obtained green cards through a sympathetic immigration lawyer who understood our situation." Detective Coleman made notes on a yellow legal pad. "And you've been here ever since? Working security, raising your daughter, staying under the radar, until today." "Yes, until today." She held up the evidence bag containing the ring. "Any idea who might want to remind you of your past?" Henri stared at the ring, its familiar weight pressing against his memory like a physical thing. "That particular ring belongs to my elder brother, Christophe. He would be the current Duke of Montclair, assuming our father has passed away." He paused, calculating. "Christophe would be 42 now. Married, probably with children of his own. Why would he track you down now? After 15 years? I do not know. Perhaps..." Henri hesitated, then forged ahead. "Perhaps something has happened to the family. Perhaps they need something from me." What he didn't say, what he couldn't bring himself to voice, was the possibility that had been haunting him since that morning. If Christophe was reaching out, if he had gone to the trouble of finding Henri after all these years of silence, it might mean that Henri's self-imposed exile was about to end, not by choice, but by necessity. The remainder of their conversation was filled with practical details: increased security measures for the school, background checks on recent visitors, protocols for monitoring Margot's safety. Detective Coleman was thorough and professional, treating Henri's revelations with the matter-of-fact approach of someone who had seen enough surprises to take nobility in stride. But as Henri walked back to his apartment that evening, Margot's hand warm in his as she chatted about her day, he felt the weight of unspoken possibilities pressing against his chest like stones. Their apartment building was a modest 3-story brick structure that housed mostly single parents, elderly residents and young couples just starting out. The hallways smelled of cooking spices and cleaning products, and the walls were thin enough that they could hear Mrs. Patterson's evening news, programs and the Martinez family's dinner conversations. Home. It was the first place that had ever truly felt like home to Henri. Not because of its grandeur or beauty, but because it was filled with Margot's laughter and their shared memories. "Papa, are you okay?" Margot asked as they climbed the stairs to their second-floor apartment. "You seem sad today." Henri paused on the landing, looking down at his daughter's upturned face. She had Isabella's eyes, dark and expressive and infinitely compassionate, but his stubborn chin and the particular way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something. "Sometimes, ma petite étoile, grown-ups have to think about difficult things. But that does not mean you need to worry. You are safe, and you are loved, and that is what matters most." Inside their apartment, surrounded by the familiar chaos of Margot's school projects and art supplies, Henri tried to maintain their normal routine. Dinner at the small kitchen table, spaghetti with marinara sauce from a jar, garlic bread that was slightly burnt, milk in plastic cups that had once held jelly, homework spread across the coffee table, while a Disney movie played softly in the background, bath time with strawberry-scented bubbles, and stories about underwater kingdoms. But even as he went through the motions of their ordinary Tuesday evening, Henri found himself memorizing details: the way Margot's wet hair curled against her neck during her bath, how she always saved the last bite of dessert to share with him, the sleepy questions she asked as he tucked her into bed. "Papa, will you sing the song about the stars?" It was their ritual, the French lullaby his own grandmother had sung to him decades ago, in a different country, in a different life. As Henri's voice filled the small bedroom with soft melody, Margot's breathing grew deep and regular, and her small hand slowly relaxed its grip on his finger after she was asleep. Henri sat at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside him, staring at the phone number Detective Coleman had given him. She had suggested he might want to contact his brother directly to find out what the ring meant and what, if anything, was expected of him. Instead, Henri opened his laptop and began researching. News about the Duchy of Montclair was sparse. A few society page mentions, some agricultural reports, notices about local festivals and charitable events. But buried in a 3-month-old article from a regional French newspaper, he found what he was looking for. Duke Philippe Dubois Montclair, 71, announced his retirement from active management of the family estates due to declining health. His eldest son, Christophe, 42, will assume full ducal responsibilities effective immediately. The younger son, Henri, has been estranged from the family for over a decade and could not be reached for comment. Henri stared at the screen until the words blurred together. His father stepping down, Christophe assuming full control, and Henri still listed as missing, still carrying the weight of responsibilities he had abandoned 15 years ago. He closed the laptop and walked to his bedroom, where he knelt beside the closet and pulled out the shoebox hidden beneath old photo albums and Margot's outgrown clothes. Inside were the documents he had kept but never looked at: his original passport, birth certificate, academic records from university, and a single photograph. The photograph was from his 21st birthday, taken in the formal gardens of the family estate. Henri stood between his parents, wearing a suit that probably cost more than he now made in 3 months. His father's hand rested proudly on his shoulder, and his mother smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose world was proceeding exactly as planned. He looked so young in the photograph, so certain that duty and tradition were weights he could eventually shrug off, that love was enough to overcome any obstacle, that running away was the same as running towards something better. Now, at 38, Henri understood the difference. He had run toward Isabella, toward the promise of a life built on their own terms. But after she died, after the grief and the sleepless nights and the overwhelming responsibility of raising Margot alone, he had simply been running from his past, from his obligations, from the possibility that he might not be strong enough to build the life his daughter deserved. The phone rang, startling him from his reverie. The caller ID showed an international number, and Henri's hand hovered over the receiver as it rang a second time, then a third. On the fourth ring, he answered. "Henri!" The voice was older than he remembered, touched with the weariness that comes from carrying too much responsibility for too long. But it was unmistakably his brother. "Mon Dieu, Henri, is it really you?" "Bonjour, Christophe." Henri's voice was steadier than he felt. "I believe you left something at my daughter's school today." The silence that followed Henri's words stretched across continents and years of separation like a bridge made of held breath. Henri could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could picture Christophe in the family study where international calls were always taken, beneath the portrait of their great-grandfather, surrounded by books that chronicled centuries of family history and obligation. "Your daughter," Christophe said finally, and Henri caught the slight tremor that betrayed his older brother's carefully controlled composure. "Henri, we need to talk. Not on the phone, not across an ocean. I'm coming to America." "Non." The refusal came automatically, 15 years of protective instincts rising like a wall. "Whatever this is about, whatever you need, I cannot. Papa is dying, Henri." The words hit like a physical blow. Henri sank into his kitchen chair, gripping the phone with fingers gone suddenly numb. Through the thin walls, he could hear the Ramirez children arguing over television channels, Mrs. Patterson's evening cooking routine, all the ordinary sounds of life continuing while his world shifted off its axis. "How long?" he whispered. "Months, perhaps weeks. The doctors are not optimistic." Christophe's voice carried the weight of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. "He asks for you, Henri. Every day he asks if we have found you." Henri closed his eyes, seeing his father as he was in that old photograph, proud, stern, devoted to duty and tradition, but never cruel. A man who had carried the weight of generations on his shoulders and had expected his sons to do the same. "I have a life here, Christophe. A daughter who knows nothing of any of this. I cannot simply. There are complications. Henri, legal complications that affect more than just our family." Papers rustled in the background, and Henri could picture his brother surrounded by documents and lawyers, trying to untangle problems that had been 15 years in the making. "When you left, when you renounced your birthright, the succession became unclear. Papa's will cannot be executed properly without your formal acknowledgement of your abdication. I never formally abdicated anything. I simply left." "Exactly the problem." Frustration crept into Christophe's voice. "You disappeared, Henri. No forwarding address, no legal documents, no official renunciation of your position in the line of succession. As far as French law is concerned, you are still second in line to the duchy." Henri felt the walls of his carefully constructed American life beginning to crack. "What does that mean?" "It means that when Papa dies, the estate goes into legal limbo until you can be found and consulted. It means that the agricultural contracts that employ half our region cannot be renewed. It means that the charitable foundation Maman established cannot continue operating. It means that everything our family has built over 4 centuries could be frozen in legal proceedings for years." The weight of it settled over Henri like a physical thing. Hundreds of employees, thousands of acres of farmland, charitable programs that supported education and health care throughout the region, all hanging in balance because he had chosen love over duty 15 years ago. The ring was meant to be a message. Christoph continued. We hired investigators to find you. When they discovered you worked at a school, I thought. I hoped it might be a gentle way to make contact. I did not anticipate it would cause such distress. Henri rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. A break-in at my daughter's school is your idea of gentle contact. The investigator was instructed to leave the ring, where only you would understand its significance. I did not realize it would appear to be, what is the word? A burglary. Christoph, I need time to think. This is not just about me anymore. I have responsibilities here, a child who... Bring her! The words came quickly, almost desperately. Bring your daughter to France. Let Papa meet his granddaughter before... Let him know that some part of you returned home. She is 8 years old. She speaks English, not French. She thinks I am a security guard. She has never even seen a photograph of your world. Then perhaps it is time she learned where she comes from. After Henri hung up the phone, he sat in his kitchen until the numbers on the microwave clock blurred from 9:47 to 10:23. Outside his window, Riverside settled into its usual evening quiet, porch lights coming on, television screens flickering behind curtains. The distant sound of someone taking their dog for a final walk before bed. Normal, safe, unremarkable. Everything he had wanted for Margot, everything he had built their life around, suddenly felt as fragile as spun glass. The next morning brought new complications. Henri arrived at work to find Principal Martinez pacing behind the reception desk like a caged animal, his usually immaculate shirt wrinkled and his hair showing signs of frantic finger-combing. Henri, thank God you're here. Martinez grabbed his arm with the desperate grip of a drowning man. We have a problem. A big problem. The morning newspapers, both local and regional, had picked up the story of the break-in. But somehow, in the way that small-town gossip grew and morphed like wildfire, the story had evolved. Headlines screamed about foreign intruders and security breaches and threats to our children's safety. The school board is meeting this afternoon, Martinez explained, waving a newspaper like evidence in a trial. Parents are calling every 5 minutes, demanding explanations. The superintendent wants a full security review, and there are rumors that some families are considering transferring their children to other schools. Henri felt his stomach drop. What does this mean for my position? I don't know yet. The board is concerned about the fact that the break-ins seem to target the main hallway where you spend most of your time. They're asking questions about background checks, about your immigration status, about... Martinez paused, looking genuinely pained. Henri, I fought for you. You're the best security guard this school has ever had. The kids love you, the teachers trust you. You've never missed a shift in 3 years. But the board is looking for someone to blame, and right now, you're the most convenient target. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of whispered conversations and worried glances. Henri tried to maintain his usual routines, but he could feel the shift in atmosphere, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Teachers who normally stopped to chat kept their conversations brief. Parents picking up sick children avoided eye contact. Even the cafeteria staff seemed subdued. At lunch, while monitoring the playground, Henri watched Margot playing with her usual group of friends. She was demonstrating some elaborate hopscotch variation, her voice carrying across the asphalt as she explained the rules with the serious intensity that children brought to their games. Mr. Henri. He turned to find Emma Rodriguez, one of Margot's classmates, standing beside him with the particular expression children wore when they had overheard something they didn't fully understand. Yes, Emma? My mama says there were bad people at our school yesterday. She says they might come back. Emma's dark eyes were wide with worry. Are we safe here? Henri knelt to Emma's eye level, choosing his words carefully. Emma, your school is very safe. All the teachers and I work hard every day to make sure you and your friends can learn and play without worry. Sometimes grown-ups hear stories and get worried, but that does not mean you are in danger. But what if the bad people come back? Then I will be here to make sure nothing happens to you or Margot or any of your friends. That is my job, and I am very good at my job." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer and skipped back to join the hopscotch game. But Henri remained kneeling on the playground, watching his daughter laugh with her friends, wondering how many more days he would be allowed to keep this promise. The school board meeting that afternoon was held in the district office conference room, a sterile space with fluorescent lighting and motivational posters about excellence in education and putting children first. Henri sat in the back row, still wearing his security uniform, while board members reviewed incident reports and insurance implications. "The simple fact," declared board member Patricia Hawkins, a woman whose children had graduated years ago but who maintained strong opinions about educational policy, "is that this incident represents a failure of our security protocols. We have entrusted the safety of our children to someone whose background we clearly don't know as well as we should." Henri felt heat rise in his chest. 3 years of perfect attendance, of staying late for school events, of learning every child's name and every parent's face, reduced to a failure of protocol. "Mrs. Hawkins," Principal Martinez interjected, "Henri Dubois has been exemplary in his duties. His background check was thorough, his references were excellent, and he has repeatedly gone above and beyond in his service to our school community. But did his background check reveal that he might be a target for international criminals?" Board member James Morrison leaned forward, his tone suggesting he had already decided Henri's guilt. "Did it reveal connections to foreign entities that might put our children at risk?" "There is no evidence that Mr. Dubois is connected to any criminal activity," Martinez replied firmly. "Detective Coleman's investigation is ongoing, but nothing suggests the perception is enough," Hawkins interrupted. "Parents are frightened. Enrollment inquiries have dropped. We cannot afford to maintain employment for someone who has become a liability, regardless of his past performance." Henri stood slowly, feeling the weight of 15 years of careful anonymity crumbling around him. "May I speak?" The board members exchanged glances, and Morrison nodded curtly. "You may address the board." Henri moved to the front of the room, acutely aware of every eye upon him. He thought of Margot, currently at Mrs. Chen's house working on homework and waiting for him to pick her up. He thought of the life they had built together, ordinary and precious, and suddenly so fragile. "My name is Henri Dubois," he began, his accent lending weight to each word. "I have worked at Riverside Elementary for 3 years. In that time, I have learned the name of every child in that school. I know which students have food allergies, which ones struggle with reading, which ones are afraid of thunderstorms. I know that Sarah Miller's parents are getting divorced, and she sometimes cries in the bathroom during lunch. I know that Tommy Chen wants to be a firefighter and brings me pictures he draws of fire trucks. I know that Marcus Johnson is being bullied by older kids and needs someone to eat lunch with him every Tuesday." The room had grown quiet, board members shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. "I came to this country 15 years ago with my pregnant wife, seeking a better life for our family. My wife died when my daughter was 3 years old, leaving me to raise her alone. I have worked every available hour since then to provide for her, to give her the stability and safety that every child deserves." Henri's voice grew stronger, fueled by 15 years of small sacrifices and unconditional love. "Yesterday, someone from my past left a message at the school, a message meant for me, not intended to frighten children or threaten anyone's safety. But my past does not define my dedication to these children or my commitment to their well-being." Patricia Hawkins cleared her throat. "Mr. Dubois, no one questions your personal dedication, but the board must consider the broader implications of the broader implication," Henri interrupted, his voice carrying the authority he had spent 15 years suppressing, "is that you are willing to destroy a man's livelihood and a child's security because you are afraid of what you do not understand." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Henri could see Martinez nodding slightly in support, could feel the uncomfortable shifting of board members who had expected contrition rather than confrontation. Furthermore, Henri continued, drawing on reserves of confidence he hadn't accessed since his university days, your investigation into my background was apparently less thorough than you believed. Had you looked more carefully, you might have discovered that I am Henri Alexandre Philippe Dubois Montclair, second son of the Duke of Montclair in Normandy, France. The foreign entities you fear are my family, reaching out after 15 years of separation because my father is dying and legal matters require my attention. The room erupted. Morrison dropped his pen. Hawkins's mouth fell open. Martinez looked as though someone had told him his security guard was actually Superman. You're saying your nobility? Morrison stammered. I am saying that I am a man who chose love over privilege, who chose to build a life with his own hands, rather than inherit one built by others. I'm a security guard because I chose to be, not because I was incapable of anything else. Henri straightened his shoulders, and for the first time in 15 years, he let himself stand with the posture he had been taught since childhood, the bearing of someone born to responsibility, trained to command respect. But I am also saying that if you terminate my employment based on fear and prejudice rather than facts, you will be making a grave mistake, not because of who I was born to be, but because of who I have chosen to become. The board meeting devolved into whispered conferences and hastily called recesses. Henri left before they could render a decision, knowing that regardless of their choice, his carefully constructed anonymity was over. That evening, as Henri helped Margot with her spelling homework, his phone rang repeatedly. First Detective Coleman, asking for clarification about his family situation. Then a reporter from the regional newspaper, somehow having gotten word of his revelation at the school board meeting. Then Mrs. Chen, calling to say that other parents had been asking her questions about Henri's background. "Papa, why does everyone want to talk to you today?" Margot asked, looking up from her worksheet with curious eyes. Henri set his phone on silent and sat beside her at their small kitchen table. "Sometimes, ma petite étoile, people become very interested in things they do not understand. But what matters is not what other people think, but what we know to be true about ourselves. What do we know to be true about ourselves?" Henri smiled, brushing a curl away from her forehead. "We know that we love each other. We know that we work hard and treat others with kindness. We know that home is not a place, but the people we choose to love." Margot nodded seriously, then returned to her homework. But Henri noticed she stayed closer to him than usual as the evening progressed, as if sensing the undercurrents of change flowing through their small apartment. The next morning brought a media circus that transformed sleepy Riverside into something resembling a movie set. News vans lined the street outside the elementary school. Reporters with microphones and cameras clustered around the entrance. Parents arriving to drop off children found themselves navigating a gauntlet of questions about the royal security guard and the French noble hiding in plain sight. Henri arrived at work through the back entrance, but his efforts at discretion proved futile. Within minutes of his arrival, Principal Martinez appeared at his side with the harried expression of a man who had spent the night fielding phone calls from reporters, district officials and concerned parents. "Henri, I need to ask you to take some time off while this situation settles down," Martinez said, avoiding eye contact. "The district superintendent feels it would be best if you remained away from the school until the media attention dies down." "Am I being terminated?" "Not officially. Consider it paid administrative leave while we reassess the situation." Henri nodded, understanding the careful language of institutional self-preservation. He was being removed not because he had done anything wrong, but because his presence had become inconvenient. As he cleaned out his small office, really just a supply closet with a desk where he kept incident reports and lost and found items, Henri felt the weight of displacement settling over him like fog. For 3 years, this school had been his anchor, his purpose, his way of contributing to the community that had welcomed him and Margot. "Mr. Henri," He turned to find a small group of children peering around the corner. Emma Rodriguez, Tommy Chen, Marcus Johnson, and several others whose names he had spoken to the school board just 24 hours earlier. "Are you leaving us?" Emma asked, her lower lip trembling with the particular devastation that children felt when their world shifted unexpectedly. Henri knelt to their level, acutely aware that this might be the last time he was allowed to fulfill the role he had come to love. "I am taking some time away, yes. But I want you all to remember something very important." The children clustered closer, hanging on his every word with the intensity they usually reserve for stories about dragons and magical kingdoms. Being safe is not about having one person watch over you. Being safe is about all of us taking care of each other. You look out for your friends. You tell a teacher if someone needs help. You remember that kindness is the strongest protection there is. "But who will eat lunch with Marcus on Tuesdays?" Tommy asked with the logical concern of a 7-year-old who understood that routines mattered. Henri glanced at Marcus, a shy child whose parents worked double shifts and who often seemed lost in the social chaos of elementary school. "Perhaps you could eat with Marcus, Tommy, and Emma and the rest of your friends. Perhaps you could all take turns making sure everyone has someone to sit with." The children nodded solemnly, accepting this responsibility with the seriousness that children brought to promises made to trusted adults. As Henri left the school for what might be the final time, he passed through the main hallway where the trophy case had been repaired, its glass gleaming and contents restored to their proper places. But he could still see in his mind's eye the golden ring that had started this avalanche of revelation and consequence. The media attention followed him home. Reporters knocked on his apartment door, left business cards with neighbors, called the building manager asking about lease information. Henri kept the curtains drawn and the television off, trying to shield Margot from the chaos swirling around their previously quiet life. But children were remarkably perceptive, and Margot had begun asking questions that Henri struggled to answer. "Papa, Mrs. Martinez says you used to live in a castle. Is that true? Why is there a man with a camera standing by our mailbox? Are we going to have to move away?" That evening, as Henri prepared dinner while reporters continued their vigil outside, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Detective Coleman's number, and Henri answered with weary resignation. "Mr. Dubois, I need you to come to the station. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind that involves international investigators, federal immigration officials, and questions about your legal status in this country that are way above my pay grade." Henri closed his eyes, feeling the last vestiges of his American anonymity crumbling away. "I will be there in an hour. And Mr. Dubois, you might want to consider calling a lawyer." After arranging for Mrs. Chen to stay with Margot, Henri made his way through the gauntlet of reporters and drove to the police station. The building, usually quiet except for the occasional traffic stop or domestic disturbance, now buzzed with activity that seemed utterly foreign to the small-town law enforcement he had grown accustomed to. Detective Coleman met him at the entrance, her expression grim. "I'm sorry about this, Henri. What started as a simple break-in investigation has turned into something much bigger." She led him to a conference room where 2 men in dark suits waited beside a table covered with documents and computer printouts. The older man, perhaps 50 with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, stood as they entered. "Mr. Dubois, I'm Agent Patterson, FBI. This is Agent Chen, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need to discuss your status in this country and some irregularities that have come to light during our background investigation." Henri sat carefully, his hands folded in his lap, trying to project calm while his heart hammered against his ribs. "What irregularities?" Agent Chen consulted his notes with the methodical precision of bureaucracy. "Your immigration records show that you and your wife entered the country on tourist visas in 2009. Those visas expired 6 months later, but you continued to reside here illegally until 2012. When you obtained green cards through an immigration attorney named Samuel Morrison, Mr. Morrison helped us navigate the legal process. Everything was done properly. Mr. Morrison was disbarred in 2018 for falsifying immigration documents, Agent Patterson interjected, which calls into question the validity of your legal status and, by extension, your daughter's citizenship. The words hit Henri like physical blows. Margot's citizenship, her birthright, her security, her American identity, suddenly cast into doubt by the corruption of a lawyer they had trusted to guide them through a system they barely understood. My daughter was born in Columbus, Ohio, Henri said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. Her birth certificate is valid, Agent Chen acknowledged, but if your presence in the country was illegal at the time of her birth, it complicates her status significantly. Henri felt the room spinning slightly, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, the air too thin. Everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for, reduced to irregularities in paperwork and the criminal actions of a man he had trusted 15 years ago. What happens now? He asked. The two agents exchanged glances, and Henri caught the subtle communication that passed between them. The recognition that they were dealing with someone whose situation fell outside normal parameters. Normally, we would begin deportation proceedings immediately, Agent Patterson said. However, your unique circumstances require consultation with higher authorities. The State Department is involved now, given your family connections and the diplomatic implications. Diplomatic implications. Mr. Dubois, you are the second son of a French duke. Your brother has been in contact with the French embassy, explaining the legal complications surrounding your father's estate. This is no longer simply an immigration matter. It's become an international relations issue. Henri rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of unintended consequences pressing down like a physical thing. His attempt to create a simple, safe life for his daughter had instead created a diplomatic incident involving two countries and multiple government agencies. I need to make a phone call, he said quietly. Agent Patterson nodded toward a phone in the corner of the room. You have the right to legal counsel, but Henri wasn't calling a lawyer. He was calling the one person who might be able to help him navigate the maze of international law and family obligation that had suddenly trapped him and Margot in its web. He dialed the international number from memory, and Christophe answered on the second ring. Henri. Thank God, I've been trying to reach you. The situation has become complicated. I am aware, Henri said dryly. I am currently sitting in a police station with federal agents who are questioning my legal right to remain in the country where my daughter was born. Listen to me carefully. Henri, I have contacted the French embassy. They are sending a diplomatic attaché to handle your situation, but... Christophe paused, and Henri could hear the weight of difficult news in his brother's hesitation. Papa wants to change his will. He wants to leave everything to you, not me. The duchy, the estates, the foundation, everything. But he cannot do so while your legal status remains in question. Henri closed his eyes, seeing his carefully constructed American dream dissolving like sugar in rain. Christophe, I cannot accept. You may not have a choice. If you are deported, if you lose your legal right to remain in America, you will have no choice but to return to France. And if you return, Papa will not die peacefully unless he knows the family legacy is secure. The cruel irony was almost unbearable. Henri had spent 15 years running from the responsibilities of nobility, only to find that those responsibilities had followed him across an ocean and were now threatening to destroy the only life he truly wanted. My daughter, Henri whispered. She is American, Christophe. This is her home, her culture, her identity. I cannot take her away from everything she knows. Then perhaps it is time she learned that she is more than just American. Perhaps it is time she discovered that she is also French nobility, heir to a legacy that spans centuries. As Henri ended the call and returned to face the federal agents, He realized that the choice he had been dreading between his American life and his French obligations was no longer his to make. The choice was being made for him by forces beyond his control, and all he could do was try to protect Margot from the worst of the consequences. The diplomatic attaché arrived at the Riverside police station exactly 47 hours after Henri's detention began, not arrested. Agent Patterson had been careful to explain, but held for consultation regarding his immigration status. The attaché was a woman in her 50s named Catherine Margot, impeccably dressed, despite having taken a red-eye flight from Washington, D.C., with the kind of composure that suggested she regularly navigated international incidents before. "Breakfast, Monsieur Dubois," she said in French as she entered the conference room, where Henri had spent the better part of 2 days, answering the same questions in different ways. "I am here on behalf of both the French embassy and your family. This situation has become rather more complicated than anyone anticipated." Henri looked up from the legal documents that had been multiplying across the table like some bureaucratic disease. His eyes were red-rimmed from sleeplessness and worry, his usually neat appearance rumpled from wearing the same clothes for 2 days. "Mademoiselle Moreau, I appreciate your assistance, but my primary concern is my daughter. She has been staying with neighbors, confused and frightened by events she cannot understand. I need to know that she will be safe and cared for regardless of what happens to me." Catherine sat across from him, her briefcase clicking open with the efficient sound of someone accustomed to solving problems that others considered impossible. "Your daughter's well-being is precisely why I am here. But first, we must address the immediate legal situation." She withdrew a thick folder and spread its contents across the table. Official documents bearing French government seals, embassy letterhead, and the kind of formal language that transformed personal chaos into diplomatic protocol. "Your brother has been busy," Catherine continued. "In the past 48 hours, he has contacted the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the embassy's legal department, and several international law firms. He has also made a formal request for your extradition, not for criminal purposes, but to fulfill your legal obligations regarding your father's estate." Henri felt the last thread of hope slipping through his fingers. "Extradition? A diplomatic solution to an immigration problem, rather than face deportation proceedings that could take years and would certainly separate you from your daughter. France is offering to resolve your legal status by reclaiming you, so to speak." Agent Patterson, who had been listening from the corner of the room, stepped forward. "Ms. Margot, the United States government doesn't typically honor extradition requests for estate planning purposes." Catherine's smile was polite but held the kind of steel that suggested she had prepared for this objection. "Under normal circumstances, you would be correct. However, Monsieur Dubois' case involves several unique factors that make it a matter of international relations rather than simple immigration law." She withdrew another document, this one bearing both American and French official seals. "First, his fraudulent immigration status means he has been residing illegally in your country for over a decade, making him subject to immediate deportation. Second, his noble status means that his continued absence from France affects legal proceedings that impact not just his family, but agricultural contracts, employment for thousands of workers, and charitable foundations that provide services to an entire region." Henri stared at the documents, seeing his life reduced to legal clauses and diplomatic considerations. "What does this mean for Margot?" "That depends entirely on choices you will need to make very soon." Catherine's expression softened slightly, revealing genuine sympathy beneath her professional demeanor. "Your daughter, as an American citizen, cannot be forced to leave this country. However, as your child, she also cannot be prevented from accompanying you if you choose to return to France. And if I choose to remain and fight the deportation, then you will likely spend months, perhaps years, in legal proceedings while your daughter remains in foster care or with temporary guardians. Meanwhile, your father will die without resolving the succession issues." potentially leaving thousands of people in economic uncertainty. The weight of it pressed against Henri's chest like a physical thing. Every choice seemed to lead to Margot's suffering, whether through separation from her father, removal from the only home she had ever known, or immersion in a world so foreign to her experience that it might as well be another planet. "I need to see my daughter," Henri said. "I need to explain this to her myself. Help her understand the choices we are facing." Catherine nodded. "That can be arranged." But Henri, she used his first name deliberately, creating a moment of personal connection amid the institutional machinery. "There is something else you need to know. Your father's condition has worsened significantly. The doctors now estimate days rather than weeks." Agent Chen, who had been silent throughout most of the conversation, cleared his throat. "Mr. Dubois, given the diplomatic nature of this situation, we're prepared to release you into the custody of the French embassy pending resolution of your status. You would be free to return home, spend time with your daughter, and make arrangements for whatever decision you choose to make." Henri looked around the conference room that had become his world for the past 2 days. The institutional beige walls, the fluorescent lighting, the water-stained ceiling tiles that he had memorized in detail. Freedom, even temporary freedom, felt almost too precious to believe. "How long do I have?" 72 hours, Catherine said. "After that, decisions will need to be made with or without your input." 30 minutes later, Henri walked out of the police station into afternoon sunshine that felt like a benediction after the artificial lighting of interrogation rooms. The media circus had grown during his detention. News vans from 3 different television stations, reporters with notebooks and cameras, curious onlookers who had come to see the royal security guard that had become a sensation in their small town. Catherine guided him through the crowd with diplomatic efficiency, deflecting questions with polite non-answers while ensuring Henri reached his car without harassment. But as they drove through downtown Riverside, Henri could see the impact his story had had on the community he had called home. The coffee shop where he and Margot sometimes stopped for hot chocolate on Saturday mornings had a line of customers who turned to stare as he passed. The library where Margot attended story time displayed newspaper headlines in its window. Even the park where they fed ducks on Sunday afternoon seemed different, touched by the kind of attention that transformed ordinary places into curiosities. "Papa! Papa, you came home!" Margot's voice carried across Mrs. Chen's front yard as Henri stepped out of his car. She ran toward him with the desperate intensity of a child who had spent 2 days wondering if her father would ever return, throwing herself into his arms with enough force to nearly knock him backward. Henri held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling the solid reality of her small body against his chest. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the diplomatic complications, not the legal proceedings, not the weight of centuries-old obligations. There was only his daughter safe in his arms and the relief of being together again. "I was so scared, Papa," she whispered against his neck. "Mrs. Chen said you had to go away for work. But Emma's mama said you were in trouble with the police, and I didn't know what to believe." Henri pulled back to look at her face, noting the shadows under her eyes and the particular pallor that came from nights spent worrying about things beyond her understanding. "I was never in danger, ma petite étoile. Sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems that take time to solve, but I was always safe, and I was always thinking about you." Mrs. Chen appeared on her front porch, wringing her hands in the anxious way of someone who had been thrust into circumstances beyond her experience. She was a kind woman in her 60s, who had emigrated from Taiwan decades earlier and understood something about starting over in a new country with different customs and expectations. "Henri, I'm so glad you are home," she said, her own accent coloring the words with warmth. "Margot has been worried, but she has been very brave. She helped me make dumplings yesterday and told me stories about her school friends. Mrs. Chen, I cannot thank you enough for caring for her." I know this situation has been difficult for everyone. We help each other, Mrs. Chen said simply. This is what neighbors do. As Henri carried Margot's overnight bag back to their apartment, he noticed the changes that 2 days had brought to their building. Some neighbors averted their eyes when he passed, uncomfortable with the media attention and government scrutiny that had descended on their quiet street. Others nodded with careful neutrality, unsure how to treat someone who had suddenly become a public figure. But Mrs. Patterson from the 3rd floor stopped him in the hallway with a firm grip on his arm. "Henri Dubois," she said in the no-nonsense tone of someone who had raised 6 children and buried a husband and had no patience for diplomatic niceties. "I don't care if you're a prince or a pauper. You've been a good neighbor and a devoted father, and that's all that matters to me." Her words, simple and direct, carried more weight than all the legal documents and government proceedings of the past 48 hours. They reminded Henri that identity was not just about titles or birthright, but about the daily choices that defined how you moved through the world. Inside their apartment, Margot immediately returned to the familiar routines that provided comfort in uncertain times. She spread her homework across the coffee table, chatted about the math problems she had missed during her stay with Mrs. Chen, and asked if they could have spaghetti for dinner because she had been worried about him and hadn't felt like eating much of anything else. But Henri could see the questions building behind her eyes, the way she studied his face for signs of the changes that had occurred during his absence. Children were remarkably perceptive about adult emotions, and Margot had developed an especially keen sensitivity to her father's moods during the years when it had been just the two of them against the world. "Papa," she said as they sat together on their second-hand couch after dinner, "Mrs. Chen said that people on television were talking about you. She said they were saying things about you being special somehow." Henri felt his heart constrict. This was the conversation he had been dreading for 15 years. The moment when he would have to explain to his American daughter that she was also something else entirely, something she had never imagined and might not want to become. "What do you know about France, ma chérie?" he asked gently. Margot considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all their conversations. "It's where you came from before I was born. They speak French there and they make good bread. And there's a big tower in Paris that's famous. All of those things are true. But there is more to my story, more about who I was before I came to America and became your papa." Henri took a deep breath, choosing his words as carefully as he once had chosen diplomatic language for state functions he barely remembered. "In France, some families have very old names and very old responsibilities. My family, your family, is one of those families. What kind of responsibilities? Taking care of land and people who work on that land, and making sure that everyone has what they need to live safely and happily. Like being the principal of a very big school, except the school is farms and forests and entire villages." Margot's eyes grew wide. "Are you like a mayor?" Henri smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "Something like that. The word we use is duke, and it means that my family has been taking care of the same region of France for hundreds of years." "So you're a duke? Like in fairy tales?" "I was born to be a duke someday, but when I met your mama, I decided that I would rather be Henri, the security guard who loved Isabella, the art student, than Duke Henri, who had to marry someone chosen by his family." Margot processed this information with the logical mind that served her well in mathematics and science. "So you gave up being a duke to be my papa?" "I gave up being a duke to follow my heart. And following my heart led me to your mama, and your mama gave me you, which was the most precious gift I have ever received." She was quiet for a long time, curled against his side while cartoons played softly on their small television. Finally, she looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her 8 years. "Papa, are you in trouble because you ran away from being a duke?" The question went straight to the heart of their situation, with the clarity that children possessed when adults became tangled in complications of their own making. "I am in a complicated situation, yes. The family I left behind needs me to come home and help them solve some problems. But coming home would mean leaving here, leaving our apartment and your school and your friends. Would I come too? Henri's throat tightened. That would be your choice, ma petite étoile. I would never make you leave the only home you have ever known. But I also cannot stay here if the government decides that I must leave. Margot sat up, facing him with the determined expression she wore when tackling difficult math problems. What's France like? Really like, not just the things in picture books. For the next hour, Henri found himself describing a world he had tried to forget. Rolling green countryside, dotted with stone villages that had stood for centuries. Farmers' markets where vendors had sold the same family recipes for generations. Forests where he had learned to ride horses and hunt and understand the rhythms of seasons on land that had been shaped by his ancestors. He told her about the chateau where he had grown up, with its tower bedrooms and secret passages and library filled with books in languages she had never heard. He described festivals where entire villages gathered to celebrate harvests, weddings that lasted for days, and Christmas mornings when snow transformed the countryside into something from a fairy tale. It sounds beautiful, Margot said softly, but also big and scary. Change is always scary, ma chérie, even when it leads to wonderful things. That night, after Margot had fallen asleep in her own bed for the first time in 3 days, Henri sat at their kitchen table with a cup of coffee and tried to make sense of the choices that lay before them. Catherine Moreau had left him with documents to review, legal papers that would formalize his return to France and his acceptance of the ducal responsibilities he had abandoned 15 years ago, but alongside the official papers was a handwritten letter from his father, delivered through diplomatic channels and bearing the familiar handwriting that Henri remembered from childhood birthday cards and congratulatory notes after school achievements. Mon fils, the letter began, I am dying, and I am proud of the man you became, even after you chose to leave us. Your brother tells me about your daughter, about the life you built with your own hands, about the respect you earned in your American community. These are noble achievements that no title could have given you. I do not ask you to return out of duty to me, but out of love for the people whose lives depend on the stability that only you can provide. The succession must be clear, the legal documents properly executed, the future secured for those who cannot secure it themselves. But mostly, I ask you to return so that I may meet my granddaughter and see for myself the miracle that came from your choice to follow your heart rather than your birthright. If you come home, Henri, you will not be returning to the life you left. You will be returning to create something new, something that honors both the traditions of our family and the values you learned in America. The letter was signed simply Papa, but the ducal seal pressed into the wax below his signature reminded Henri of the weight of ceremony and tradition that would surround any decision he made. Henri folded the letter carefully and looked around their small apartment, at Margot's artwork covering the refrigerator, at the couch where they watched movies together, at the kitchen table where she did homework while he prepared dinner after long shifts at the school. Home. This had been home, the first place that had ever felt like home. But home, Henri was beginning to understand, was not just a place. It was the people you chose to love, and the responsibilities you chose to accept. The question was not whether he could give up his American life, but whether he could create a new life that honored both his daughter's American identity and his own French heritage. The next morning brought a decision that surprised even Henri himself. The decision crystallized for Henri at 6:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, as he stood in their apartment bathroom, watching Margot brush her teeth with the methodical concentration she brought to all her morning routines. She had asked, through a mouthful of toothpaste foam, whether they should pack her stuffed animals if they were going to move to France, and the casual way she said it, as if discussing a change of address rather than abandoning everything she had ever known, made Henri realize something profound about his daughter's resilience. Children, he understood in that moment, were remarkably adaptable when they felt secure in their parents' love. It was not the place that made them feel safe, but the presence of the person who had always protected them. "Ma petite étoile," he said as she rinsed and spit, "how would you feel about an adventure? A very big adventure that would let you see where Papa grew up and meet family you have never known." Margot considered this with the seriousness she applied to all of Henri's questions. "Would I still be me? Would I still be American? You will always be exactly who you choose to be. Being born in America makes you American forever, no matter where you live. But being part of our family also makes you French, and I think it might be time for you to discover what that means." She nodded solemnly. "And you'll be with me the whole time? Every moment of every day, until you are old enough to choose your own adventures." An hour later, Henri called Catherine Moreau at the French embassy. "Mademoiselle Moreau, I have made my decision. I will return to France with my daughter, but I have conditions." Catherine's voice carried across the phone line with diplomatic caution. "What conditions?" "First, Margot retains her American citizenship and her right to return to the United States at any time she chooses, even if that choice comes when she is still a minor. Second, we establish a trust fund that will pay for her American education if she decides to attend university here. Third, she spends at least 1 month every summer in Ohio, maintaining connections with the friends and community she is leaving behind. Those seem reasonable. What else?" Henri looked around their small apartment, seeing it with the clarity that came from impending departure. "I want to ensure that the Riverside Elementary School receives an endowment for their security and educational programs. Anonymous, but substantial enough to honor the 3 years they gave me to discover who I could become when I was free to choose my own path." "How substantial?" Henri quoted a figure that represented roughly half of his projected inheritance from the ducal estates. Catherine was quiet for so long that Henri wondered if the connection had been lost. "Henri," she said finally, "that amount would transform not just the school, but the entire school district. Good. Education opened the world to me when I was Margot's age. I want the same opportunity available to every child in this community." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering legal details and diplomatic protocols that would facilitate their departure while protecting Margot's rights and Henri's ability to honor his commitments to both his French responsibilities and his American community. That afternoon, Principal Martinez arrived at Henri's apartment with an expression that suggested he was still struggling to reconcile. His security guard with the international news stories about French nobility hiding in small-town Ohio. "Henri, I owe you an apology," Martinez began, as they sat in the modest living room where Margot was building elaborate castles from cardboard boxes, preparing for their move with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children brought to major life changes. "You owe me nothing, Monsieur Martinez. You protected the school and the children, which was your responsibility. I understand why the board felt they needed to distance themselves from my situation, but we should have trusted you, should have fought harder for you. You've been—" Martinez paused, searching for words. "You've been the heart of our school community in ways that go far beyond security duties." Henri smiled, remembering the children who had trusted him with their fears and secrets. The teachers who had relied on him not just for safety, but for the kind of steady presence that made their work possible. What matters is that the children are safe and loved. The rest is just, how do you say, politics. Martinez reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "The school board met in emergency session this morning. After your revelations about your background became public, we received calls from several major donors offering to contribute to our programs. Apparently, the story of a French duke working as a security guard to provide for his daughter has captured people's imagination." He opened the folder to reveal pledge cards and donor Commitments that totaled more than the school's annual budget. We're going to be able to fully fund the arts program, reduce class sizes, upgrade our technology, and, Henri, we're going to be able to create an international exchange program that will let our students experience other cultures the way your daughter is about to experience France. Henri felt his eyes burn with unexpected emotion. The community that had welcomed him as a refugee from his own privilege was transforming his departure into an opportunity for the children who would remain. There's more, Martinez continued. The board voted unanimously to create the Henri Dubois Excellence in Education Award, given annually to an educator who demonstrates exceptional dedication to student welfare and community service. Monsieur Martinez, I'm honored, and we'd like you to present the first award yourself. When you return for visits with Margot, the next few days passed in a blur of preparations that felt both momentous and surprisingly ordinary. Henri arranged for their furniture to be donated to families in need, keeping only the photographs. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations that felt both momentous and surprisingly ordinary. Henri arranged for their furniture to be donated to families in need, keeping only the photographs and personal items that carried the weight of their shared memories. Margot approached the packing process with the methodical efficiency of someone organizing a sleepover, carefully choosing which books and toys would accompany her to France and which would stay with Mrs. Chen for safekeeping until we come back to visit. Detective Coleman stopped by on their final afternoon, ostensibly to complete the paperwork that would close the investigation into the school break-in, but really to say goodbye to a man who had become more than just another case in her files. You know, she said as they sat on Henri's couch while Margot played in her room. In 20 years of police work, I've never seen anything quite like this. Most people's secrets are messy and complicated and usually hurt someone. But your secret, it's actually made the whole community stronger. Henri looked around their nearly empty apartment, seeing the spaces where Margot's artwork had been carefully removed from walls, where their small dining table had stood, where they had built a life together one ordinary day at a time. Sometimes the best secrets are the ones we keep to protect the people we love, he said quietly. But sometimes those same secrets become prisons that keep us from becoming who we are meant to be. And who are you meant to be, Henri? Henri considered the question that had haunted him for 15 years. I am meant to be Margot's father. Everything else, Duke, security guard, American, French, those are just roles I play while fulfilling that one essential truth. That evening, as Henri and Margot shared their final dinner in the apartment that had been home for 3 years, the doorbell rang with the particular persistence that suggested someone with official business. Henri opened the door to find a teenager wearing the uniform of a local flower delivery service, holding a bouquet so large it obscured most of his face. Delivery for Henri and Margot Dubois, the teenager announced, consulting his clipboard with the careful attention of someone working his first job. The flowers were beautiful, but not unusual. A mix of roses, lilies, and baby's breath arranged with professional skill. What was unusual was the accompanying card, written in children's careful handwriting on construction paper, covered with crayon drawings of stick figures and hearts. Dear Mr. Henri and Margot, the card read, we made this card at school today. Mrs. Wilson helped us write it, but we did all the pictures ourselves. We want you to know that we will miss you very much, but we hope you have fun adventures in France. Please remember to come back and visit us. We will practice our French so we can talk to you better when you come home. Love, your friends at Riverside Elementary. The card was signed with dozens of names in various stages of penmanship development. Emma Rodriguez, Tommy Chen, Marcus Johnson, and all the other children whose names Henri had carried in his heart during those long days of government questioning and diplomatic negotiations. Henri felt his throat tighten as he read the names aloud to Margot, watching her face light up with the particular joy that came from being remembered by friends. Papa, look, she said, pointing to a drawing on the back of the card. Emma drew us on an airplane going to France, but she put a line going back to Ohio too. She says that's our return trip, the confidence. In that drawing, the assumption that leaving was not the same as never. Returning carried more comfort than all the legal documents and diplomatic assurances Henri had received over the past week. The next morning, their final morning in Riverside, Henri woke before dawn and walked through their neighborhood one last time. The streets were quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, lit only by porch lights and the occasional passing car. He walked past Mrs. Chen's house, where a light in the kitchen window suggested she was already preparing for the day. Past Mrs. Patterson's building, where her newspaper lay, waiting on the front step. Past the elementary school, where empty swings moved gently in the morning breeze. At the end of his walk, Henri found himself standing in the small park, where he and Margot had fed ducks every Sunday for 3 years. The pond reflected the early morning sky, and Henri could almost see the ghost images of all their Sunday mornings. Margot giggling as ducks fought over breadcrumbs, her small hand warm in his as they walked the path around the water. Her excited chatter about school friends and weekend plans. This was what he would miss most, Henri realized. Not the apartment or even the job at the school, but the ordinariness of their life together. The simple pleasure of being nobody special, of having problems that could be solved with overtime shifts and careful budgeting, of existing in a world where a father's love for his daughter was the only credential that mattered. But as the sun rose over the park, painting the water gold and bringing the familiar sounds of a community waking up, Henri felt something shift in his understanding of the choice he was making. He was not abandoning this life, he was expanding it. Margot would carry this place with her wherever they went, the memory of feeding ducks and riding bikes and learning to tie her shoes in this small Ohio town. And someday, when she was old enough to choose for herself, she could return and add new memories to these foundations. The flight to France departed from Columbus International Airport at 2:30 p.m. Catherine Margot met them at the gate, accompanied by a young man in his 20s who introduced himself as Jean-Luc, Christophe's oldest son and Henri's nephew. Uncle Henri, Jean-Luc said in French, then immediately switched to heavily accented English when he saw Margot's confused expression.
I am sorry.
Uncle Henri, I am very excited to meet you both. Papa has told me so many stories about you. Margot studied Jean-Luc with the intense scrutiny she reserved for new people, taking in his friendly smile and the family resemblance that marked him unmistakably as Henri's relative. You look like Papa, she announced with the directness that only children possessed. But younger. And your hair is different, Jean-Luc laughed. And the sound was so reminiscent of Henri's own laugh that Catherine Margot smiled, despite her professional composure. I think we're going to be great friends, Cousin Margot, Jean-Luc said. I have been practicing my English just for you. As their plane lifted off from Columbus, Henri watched Ohio disappear beneath them through Margot's window. She pressed her face against the glass with the wonder that children brought to their first airplane ride, pointing out cars that looked like toys and houses that became increasingly distant until they were lost in patterns of green and brown that looked like abstract art. Papa, will we really live in a castle? She asked as they reached cruising altitude and the flight attendants began their service. We will live in a chateau, which is like a castle, but with more windows and better heating, Henri said. And yes, it is very old and very big, and it has been home to our family for many, many years. Will there be other children there? Henri thought of Jean-Luc, who was really more of a young adult, and of Christophe's other children whom he had never met. Yes, ma chérie, you will have cousins to play with, and there are children in the village who will become your friends. Will they like me even though I'm American? The question went straight to Henri's heart, revealing the insecurity that Margot had been hiding beneath her excitement about their adventure. She was 8 years old, leaving everything familiar, trusting that her father's love would be enough to guide them both through whatever challenges awaited. "They will love you," Henri said with absolute certainty, "because you are kind and funny and smart and brave. And if they are too foolish to see those things immediately, then you will show them by being exactly who you are." The flight to Paris took 8 hours, during which Margot alternated between napping against Henri's shoulder, working in activity books that Jean-Luc had brought, and asking approximately 400 questions about France, chateaux, and what it meant to be a duke. "Will I have to curtsy to you when you become a duke?" she asked during dinner service, causing Jean-Luc to nearly choke on his airline coffee. "Absolutely not," Henri said firmly. "You are my daughter, which means you curtsy to no one ever. Everyone else curtsies to you, even grown-ups, especially grown-ups." They landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport as the sun was setting over Paris, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that made the city look like something from a fairy tale. Henri felt his chest tighten as he heard French voices all around them, as familiar accents and phrases washed over him like a tide of memory. Christophe was waiting for them beyond customs, looking older than Henri had expected, but unmistakably the brother who had shared his childhood and adolescence. They stood facing each other for a long moment, 15 years of separation and misunderstanding hanging between them like a bridge neither was certain would hold their weight. Then Christophe stepped forward and embraced Henri, with the fierce intensity of someone who had feared this reunion might never come. "Mon frère," Christophe whispered against Henri's ear. "Welcome home." But it was Margot who broke the emotional tension, stepping forward with the natural confidence she had inherited from both her parents and extending her hand to her uncle with perfect American politeness. "Hello, Uncle Christophe," she said in carefully pronounced English. "I'm Margot. Thank you for inviting us to visit your castle." Christophe knelt to her level, and Henri saw tears gathering in his brother's eyes as he took in his niece's face, so much like Isabella's, but carrying the unmistakable stamp of the Dubois family in her chin, and the particular way she tilted her head when concentrating. "Mademoiselle Margot," Christophe said in English that was more polished than Jean-Luc's, "it is my very great honor to meet you. And it is not my castle, it is our castle. It belongs to all of us, and it has been waiting for you to come home." The drive to Normandy took 2 hours through countryside that seemed to exist in a different century from the Ohio farmland Margot knew. Ancient stone churches rose from villages that had been old when Columbus discovered America. Forests stretched to horizons unmarked by telephone wires or billboards. Sheep grazed in fields divided by hedgerows that had been shaped by generations of careful tending. "It's like a movie," Margot said softly, her face pressed against the window as they passed through a village where cobblestone streets reflected the warm light from shop windows. "It is like home," Henri corrected gently, and realized as he said it that it was true. This landscape was written into his bones, carried in his DNA, present in dreams he had forgotten he still dreamed. They arrived at Chateau Montclair as the last light was fading from the sky. Henri heard Margot's sharp intake of breath as they passed through the gates, and the chateau came into view. 3 stories of golden stone rising from manicured gardens. Windows glowing with warm light, towers and turrets that belonged in fairy tales, made real. "Papa," Margot whispered, "is this really where you grew up?" "This is really where I grew up, and where you will grow up too, if you choose to stay." The next hours passed in a whirlwind of introductions to family members Henri hadn't seen in 15 years, and staff members who remembered him as a child. There was Christophe's wife, Marie-Claire, who embraced Henri as if he were a brother she had always known, and immediately began planning Margot's education with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex households. There were Christophe's children, Jean-Luc, whom they had met at the airport, 16-year-old Isabella and 12-year-old Philippe, all of whom surrounded Margot with the curiosity and kindness that came naturally to children raised with strong family values. But the most important introduction came last, when Christophe led Henri and Margot to the suite of rooms on the second floor that had been prepared as their temporary residence. Papa is very weak, Christophe explained as they walked down a corridor lined with portraits of ancestors dating back centuries. The doctors have made him as comfortable as possible, but, he paused, choosing his words carefully for Margot's benefit. He tires easily, and he may not look exactly like you expect a grandfather to look. They found Duke Philippe Dubois Montclair in the library that had always been his favorite room, surrounded by books that chronicled the history of their family and their region. He was thinner than Henri remembered, his face marked by illness and age, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had guided the duchy for 4 decades. "Henri," he said softly, extending a hand that trembled slightly with effort. "My son, you came home." Henri knelt beside his father's chair, taking the offered hand in both of his own, feeling the familiar weight of the ducal ring that would someday pass to him. "Papa, I want you to meet your granddaughter." "Margot, this is your grand-père." Margot approached with unusual shyness, overwhelmed by the formality of the library and the obvious frailty of the man she was meeting. But Philippe's face transformed when he saw her, years seeming to fall away as he smiled with pure joy. "Ma petite fille," he said. "You are even more beautiful than your papa described in his letters." "I don't speak French very well yet," Margot said apologetically, "but Jean-Luc is going to teach me. And Papa said you might tell me stories about when he was little." "I have many stories about your papa," Philippe said, patting the chair beside his own, "including the story about the time he tried to teach the chateau's cat to fetch like a dog, and the story about when he decided to reorganize my entire library according to the color of the book covers instead of alphabetical order," as Margot settled beside her grandfather and began asking the kinds of questions that only 8-year-olds could think to ask. Henri felt something click into place in his chest. This was what he had been running from 15 years ago. Not the responsibility or the tradition, but the fear that accepting his birthright would mean losing himself in a role that others had defined for him. But watching his daughter connect with her grandfather, seeing the way his father's eyes lit up as he shared stories and answered questions, Henri realized that titles and traditions were not prisons unless you allowed them to be. They were frameworks that could be shaped by the people who inhabited them, tools that could be used to create the kind of life that honored both heritage and personal choice. The next week passed quickly as Henri reacquainted himself with the estate he would inherit, and Margot began to find her place in a world that was both completely foreign and somehow familiar. She attended the local school with her cousins, surprising everyone with how quickly she picked up French and how naturally she adapted to European educational methods. She explored the chateau with the fearless curiosity of childhood, discovering secret passages and forgotten rooms that even Henri had never known existed. Most importantly, she spent every evening with her grandfather, listening to stories that connected her to generations of family history she had never known existed. "Papa," she said to Henri one evening as he tucked her into the 4-poster bed in her new room, "Grandpère says that when you become the Duke, I'll be a real princess. Is that true?" Henri sat on the edge of her bed, brushing curls away from her face with the same gentle motion he had used in their small Ohio apartment. "You have always been a real princess, ma petite étoile. The title just makes it official. Will I have to do princess things, like wear fancy dresses and go to parties?" Henri laughed softly. "You will have some ceremonies to attend, yes. But being a princess, being part of this family, mostly means taking care of people who need help, making sure everyone in our region has what they need to live safely and happily. It means using whatever privileges you have to make the world better for others." Margot considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Like how you used to take care of all the kids at school?" "Exactly like that, but on a bigger scale. I think I can do that," she said with the confidence that 8-year-olds possessed when they had been raised by parents who believed in their capacity for goodness. "Especially if you help me learn how." Philippe passed away peacefully 3 weeks after their arrival. with Henri holding one hand and Margot holding the other, surrounded by family and staff members who had served the duchy faithfully for decades. His final words were to Margot, "Take care of your papa, ma chérie. He has a big heart, but he will need your American practicality to keep him grounded." The funeral was attended by representatives from across France and several other European countries, acknowledging Philippe's contributions to agriculture, education, and international relations. But for Henri, the most meaningful moment came when the local farmers and shopkeepers, people whose families had worked the estate for generations, approached him after the ceremony to express their condolences and their confidence in his ability to continue his father's work. "Monsieur le Duc," said an elderly farmer whose weathered hands spoke of decades of working the land, "your father was a good man who cared for all of us like family. We trust that you will do the same." Henri accepted the title and the responsibility with the same mixture of humility and determination that had guided him through 15 years of single parenthood. The investiture ceremony was held in the chateau's main hall, with Margot standing beside him in a dress that Marie-Claire had commissioned from Paris, formal enough for the occasion, but practical enough for an 8-year-old who might need to sit through several hours of French ceremonial protocol, as Henri accepted the ducal ring from the regional prefect and formally took ownership of lands that had been in his family for 4 centuries. He looked out at the assembled crowd and saw not just dignitaries and officials, but teachers from Margot's new school, farmers from the estate, shopkeepers from the village, and children who had already begun to accept his daughter as one of their own. This was what he had been born to do, Henri realized. Not to rule over people, but to serve them. Not to preserve traditions unchanged, but to honor them while adapting them to meet the needs of a changing world. The ceremony concluded with Margot presenting her father with a handmade card, construction paper covered with crayons and glitter, featuring a drawing of their family that now included not just Henri and Margot, but Christophe, Jean-Luc, Isabelle, Philippe, and Marie-Claire, all holding hands under a rainbow that stretched from a drawing of Chateau Montclair to a small building labeled Riverside Elementary. "I wanted to make sure everyone knew we didn't forget where we came from," she explained as Henri read the card, his eyes burning with unexpected emotion. "We will never forget, ma petite étoile, and we will never stop being grateful for every place and every person who helped make us who we are." 6 months later, Henri received a letter from Principal Martinez informing him that the Henri Dubois Excellence in Education Award had been presented for the first time to Mrs. Wilson, Margot's former second-grade teacher, who had organized a pen pal program connecting Riverside Elementary students with children at Margot's new school in France. The award came with a substantial financial prize, Martinez wrote, which Mrs. Wilson used to establish a small library of French children's books and to begin offering basic French lessons to any student who was interested. She says that Margot's transition to life in France inspired her to help other children become citizens of the world. Henri shared the letter with Margot over breakfast in the chateau's morning room, where spring sunshine streamed through windows that had been installed when Thomas Jefferson was President of the United States. "I want to write back to Mrs. Wilson," Margot said, spreading jam on a croissant that bore no resemblance to the toaster pastries she had eaten for breakfast in Ohio. "I want to tell her about the school here, and about how Grandpère's library has books in 6 different languages. What will you tell her about adjusting to life in France?" Margot considered the question while she ate, her expression serious in the way that suggested she was thinking about something important. "I'll tell her that home isn't really about where you live," she said finally. "Home is about being with people who love you for who you really are. And sometimes finding out who you really are means going to places you never expected to go." Henri looked at his daughter, American by birth, French by heritage, comfortable in both worlds, because she had been raised with love that transcended geography, and realized that she had learned the most important lesson he could teach her. Identity was not about choosing between the different parts of yourself, but about finding ways to honor all of them while staying true to the values that mattered most. That afternoon, as Henri walked through the estate grounds with the weekly reports that kept him informed about everything from crop yields to school enrollment numbers, he found Margot in the chateau's garden with her cousins and several children from the village. They were playing an elaborate game that seemed to combine elements of American hide-and-seek with French court intrigue, all conducted in a mixture of languages that would have confused adult translators, but which the children navigated with ease. "Papa," Margot called when she saw him, "we're playing diplomatic missions. I'm the American ambassador, trying to make peace between the Kingdom of the Rose Garden and the Republic of the Fountain." Henri watched his daughter mediate an international crisis involving a disputed soccer ball and a disagreement over snack-sharing protocols. And he understood that she had already begun to create the kind of life that honored multiple cultures while serving the common good. As the sun set over Normandy, countryside that had been shaped by centuries of careful stewardship, Henri felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing he had made the right choice, not just for his family's legacy, but for his daughter's future. Margot would grow up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable in Ohio farmland and French chateau, carrying the best of both worlds wherever her own choices eventually led her. And someday, when she was old enough to decide for herself, she would inherit not just a title and estates, but the understanding that privilege was meaningless unless it was used in service of others. But for now, she was 8 years old and playing diplomatic, games in a castle garden with cousins who thought her American accent was exotic and friends who had accepted her presence as naturally as children accepted all the wonderful surprises that life could offer. Henri Dubois Montclair, Duke of Montclair, devoted father, former security guard, and citizen of 2 countries, watched his daughter negotiate peace treaties with 8-year-old diplomats, and knew that some fairy tales, the ones written by love and shaped by courage, really did have happily ever after endings. They just looked different than anyone expected. We hope you enjoyed Henri and Margot's incredible journey from Ohio to French nobility. Stories like this take considerable time and effort to craft. If this tale moved you, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with friends who appreciate stories about family, sacrifice, and finding home in unexpected places.